Welcome back to AM Agenda. We're going to take you live now to Sydney, where New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern is speaking at the Lowy Institute.
But more often than not, in the company of others who share similar values and interests. But multilateral institutions are imperfect, and they have and they will fail us. And when they do fail, our first port of call must always be to find ways to make them stronger. Equally, we cannot be left unable to respond to global challenges because we encounter dysfunction or, worse yet, moral failings. In recent times, there has been no better example of that than the failure of the UN to appropriately respond to the war in Ukraine because of the position taken by Russia in the Security Council, a morally bankrupt position on their part, in the wake of a morally bankrupt and illegal war. Under these circumstances, waiting for our multilateral institutions to act was not an option for New Zealand. Here, when the system fails, we seek partnerships and approaches based on the second principle of our independent foreign policy, our values. A conviction that we have a moral responsibility to do our part to maintain the rules-based order, that regardless of whether a collective approach is possible, maintaining the basic values of human rights, gender equality, state sovereignty, climate action, that falls on each of us to defend and uphold. That we are increasingly interdependent on one another and are and have always been impacted by the choice of others. But we, of course, have to recognise that these principles of collectivism or global cooperation and our values are and will always be shaped by the third principle, place. And our place is in the Pacific. The Pacific is who we are as well as where we are. It is both our identity and our place in the world. We are a nation whose founding document between its Indigenous people and the Crown is known as the Treaty of Waitangi, or Te Treaty o Waitangi. And it's our First Nations people who have shared a voyaging history. Our people came from Waka, mapping the Pacific. These documents, connections and history to continue to shape us as a nation. And while I know this is not often how we are positioned, when you look at a map with New Zealand at the centre rather than at the bottom, or if we're being honest, missing from the map entirely, our islands are bounded by the Pacific and Southern Oceans and the Tasman Sea, a region with its own history, culture and institutions. And one of the reasons when we took office, we launched the Pacific Reset. For us, the regional architecture of the Pacific is critical. New Zealand is absolutely committed to the Pacific Islands Forum as a vehicle for addressing regional challenges. To that end, forum members have been working together to develop the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent to provide a long-term vision of what we want to achieve together for our region. We have a strong commitment to supporting broader ambitions for our region's security, as set out in the Bikitawa and Bow declarations. Importantly, we see local security challenges being resolved locally, with Pacific Island Forum members' security being addressed first and foremost by the Forum family. That's because we have a history of meeting one another's needs, including most recently through the regional deployment of personnel to Honiara to support the re-establishment of peace and stability following unrest. The model exists, and we should use it. That is not to say there will not be others who have an interest in the Pacific. There are. France, Japan, the UK, US and China have all played a role in the Pacific for many, many years. It would be wrong to characterise this engagement, including that of China, as new. It would also be wrong to position the Pacific in such a way that they have to pick sides. These are democratic nations with their own sovereign right to determine their foreign policy engagements. We can be country neutral.
That is where we leave the New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern giving an address to the Lowy Institute here in Sydney ahead of a forum with Australia and New Zealand business leaders as well as the Prime Minister. We will bring you the latest on that throughout the day.